Okay. And I don't know if I'm on mute, Jordan. Or the gain is down, or the main is down, or something. Yeah, getting those. Okay, I honestly do my best to get here. But do you hear what I sound like? I'm singing well today, aren't I? We're going to rush through this not as rapidly as we can, but respectfully to those teachers who are running classrooms and will be out. And normally I try to, the only way for me to get here sooner is to cut back on the sermon.
Don't do that, that's in your face.
Yeah, exactly, yes. And I can't do that, and so, we let out, and I try to get through. I try not to turn my back to anybody who wants to talk to me. I don't look and say, look, I know you're having a hard time, but I got to get to Sunday school, so can you speed it up? Yes. Okay, we've talked and talked and talked about this. Quit drinking, quit smoking, quit chewing, Then, yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, we are in Numbers today, all right? So we have had Genesis, which is the seed promised, and I know that there's much more to these books than what I'm giving you at the moment, but it's all about conception and God promising Adam and Eve that a seed would come through them, and then we begin to follow the lineage through Genesis. Exodus is the birth of the nation. Conception has taken place. The birth of God's people takes place. And I don't mean to say that I don't mean to indicate to you that the Jews are God's people and the Christians are not. Paul talks about this in Romans, that there was an ingrafting and it was God's will all along that this would take place, and that these are the people of God, okay? So that there is some scholarly argument about whether or not the church has replaced Israel, in the sense that we don't see Israel or the Jews as God's people any longer. I don't look at it as that they're not God's people any longer. I look at it as and say there is nothing special in the sense of being a God's child through being just a Jew nationally, all right? There's no difference. If you're a Jew in the sense that you are a child of God, you have been incorporated into that, and what the Jews had prior to Jesus coming was the prophets, was the Word of God, the heritage that's there. There's nothing there to dismiss, but it's not as though we say all Jews are going to be saved because they're Jewish. That's not the case. So we go from Genesis being the conception, Exodus being the birth, coming through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and following all that, all the way to the end of Jacob's boys who end up in Israel. We go through Leviticus, which is now we got a new family, our children are all together. What are the rules? What's this look like for us to follow God? How do we approach him? That's what we looked at last week. There were specific rules to how we were supposed to approach God and be clean in the process. And Jesus in John chapter 14 actually deals with that, saying to them, you want to know how to get to God? I'm the way. I am the truth. I am the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So the whole idea of this past ritual cleansing, all these rules that went along with how do I approach God, they are all fulfilled, all culminated in the person of Jesus Christ. So that's who we come through, okay? So that's what this Old Testament has been about so far. Now, Numbers. We get to the book of Numbers, and if you want to look at it from, trying to keep the story straight, Numbers is all about the time out, okay? The discipline that's necessary to keep the family together. So we get to Leviticus and we got all these rules and saying this is how you approach me and this is what it means to be my people and this is what it looks like. And the people couldn't do it. And so as a good parent, God says, okay, time out. You aren't going to get into the promised land. We don't get to go to Valley Fair today. All right? Those things that we said we were going to do because of your behavior, not going to do them. Not yet. I know it. So what do we have to do? What are we going to do with this generation of people who do not want to follow God, who will not trust God? How in the world do I bring a generation behind them? How do I bring the future of Israel into the promised land when the generation I'm working with right now won't trust me? What's that? Well, that's one of the ways. Time. What does time do to the generation that exists? What would happen to you after so many years in the wilderness? You'll die off. And I don't mean to say that flippantly. I mean to say that God is being patient and kind and saying, okay, I'm not giving you what was promised to you yet. You can go over here and live out your lives. I'll deal with the next generation that trusts me and will follow me. Think about that right now. Are we the generation that trusts God, or is he waiting for the next? Because if that's the case, I've got another 30 years or so of my life that I'm going to live, and then I'll pass away, and God will say, now I'll get to work. I don't want that. I want to be a guy who said, God says, oh, hey, not that I want to be Job, but have you considered my servant Job? You know, there's something about that says, Lord, you know, here am I, send me, says Isaiah, right? You don't want to be the generation that says, here am I, send them. Because God will do that. So, beginning on the left-hand side, if you're going to fill in these blanks with me, you're going to see that we're at Sinai. S-I-N-A-I. S-I-N-A-I. We're at Sinai, and the planning is taking place. That's the next line. That's verses 1 through 10a. The planning takes place. Now, if you want to understand that planning, you see that in verses 1 through 4, number 1 is there's a census taken. Who are all the people? What tribes do they belong to? Now this is really interesting. The next one that we come to is the camp layout. All right? And I wish I would have had it on PowerPoint. I have it. What happens is in the week I find it. It's my little memory stick. And then I put it somewhere that says, remember where you put this. And then I forget where I put it. And then Sunday comes around and I can't find it again. Well, I would do that. Steve, Stephen, I could sit here and say, put it here, put it. I know, put it on top of the little chest thing I have at home. And then I move it again. And then I forget where I moved it to. So, Anyway, if you look at the camp layout, according to the tribes that are put in there, tell me what it looks like. Somebody said it? A cross, right. So if you look at the way that God puts the tribes on the north, south, east, and west, and you look from above, you can see that I would say that God was not, his planning was not something that he thought later on, hey, let's use a cross. That would be a good way to take my son's life. Jesus was slain before what? Foundations of the earth. Before God ever created anything, the plan was in place. Okay? So the fact that we go back and we see things like this and we say, wow, that's a pretty neat coincidence. Did the people know that they had made a cross at that time? I don't think there's any coincidence at all. I think God was revealing the way to approach him and what his family looked like would be found in the cross of Jesus Christ. So you have the census, then you have the camp layout, which is the tribes, the priests and the Levites. This is a really cool thing that you might not know. When you study the camp layout, okay, all the way up to the priests that were guarding the, it's not temple, what was the tent? Tent. What was the tent? It's the tent. It's the tabernacle. Yeah, it's not the temple. It's the tabernacle. And you understand how the layout was as it was, with the priests who were not allowed to let anybody in to get to the presence of God. Do you know if a foreigner came in and they were just going to come in and walk into the Holy of Holies, do you know what the responsibility of the camp members and the priests were? Kill them. Yeah. Why? Because there's only one way to approach God. And you don't just walk in flippantly. So the camp was set up in such a way, and the priests were stationed in such a way as to protect the righteousness and the holiness of God. Not that God needed it. God could drop that person dead if he wanted to, right? But the responsibility of the people was to also be protective of that. So we have got to protect, in a sense, we are the ones who stand before the righteousness of God, and we say to the world, there's only one way to come to Jesus or come to the Father. Only one way. Right now, we're not, don't anybody get it in their through their thick head this morning. You mean we're supposed to kill people who don't come to God properly? That's my job. No, that's not your job anymore. God's taken care of that. In the Old Testament, it was. They were a political machine as much as they were a spiritual machine, okay? And so it's like today, politically, we have a government set in place and the government exercises its will. They did the same thing. That's why when God calls for the destruction of a people, there are several things you have to remember. Number one is Israel was a political nation. They were to exercise what we would call capital crimes today. Okay? Not only was Israel a political entity, I have to remember where I started with this and why. See, this is why I forget what it is that where I lay my stuff, and I also forget sometimes where my brain's going with things. But so Israel not only had a responsibility to protect the holiness of God, being a political company, and I'll figure out what it was in a minute, and I'll tell it to you. So no big deal. They appoint Aaron and his sons to serve as priests. Anyone else who approaches the sanctuary must be put to death. The priests, the Kohathites, the Gershonites, and then 5 through 10 are the rules and planning about camp cleanliness, right? How to deal with certain diseases, how to find restitution, what to do in case of unfaithfulness, what the Nazirite vows meant, temple dedication, the Levites and their responsibilities, the celebration of Passover, the description of the cloud of God, and the trumpet's blast. All these things take place at Sinai, okay? So it's not just in Exodus that we're here. We find this in Numbers. Now, because we can't do what we're told, we can't even live up to, first of all, can't live up to the 10 Commandments. Once we find out that we can't do that, we're definitely not going to be able to live up to the Levitical code, right? That's more rules. And it's not rules in the sense, please understand this, it is not rules in the sense that God was a grumpy old man and didn't want his children to experience goodness, okay? They were rules about teaching us how to approach God. It's not just, hey, you know, you got a dirty face and filthy hands, go wash up before supper, okay? That is not the picture that's being painted here. God, boy, I tell you what, God's just waiting to get you. He is painting a picture here for us of what it looks like to come, for us to come in His presence. Then when we understand the fulfillment of all this in the person of Jesus Christ, we understand that we have to come to Jesus for cleanliness to come to the Father. It makes sense at that point in time. Thank the Lord that we are on the latter half of this, right? Okay, now, because we're not going to be able to live up to these things and a timeout is necessary, we're going to go to the wilderness of Paran, P-A-R-A-N. The wilderness of Paran, or the protesting, Paran protesting, if you will. That's 10 through 19. Chapters 10 through 19. So they say, well, good grief, better to be in Egypt. Can't believe we're here, right? That's the first thing you see is the comparison that takes place. This is the fire from God that consumes people because they're complaining. They're making this comparison. Boy, it sure would be good to be back and have some of those herbs that we had in Egypt. I don't know who this God is that brought us out into the desert, but I had a comfy bed at least back in Egypt. Here I've got to live out in the desert. You remember all the other complaining that went on there too, right? No meat, no bread. Hey, by the way, before you go and complain about these people, have you ever been on a no-carb diet? Do you know what happens to you at about day 3? Well, probably the end of the first day. Where are the carbs? Give me some bread, man. I mean, you salivate over a half-broken saltine that you found under the kitchen or under the refrigerator when you moved it, and you're thinking, oh, carbs, So don't be too hard on Israel, okay? The picture that you're getting is the picture of what sin does to us. I often think, my wife showed me a text before I came up and preached this morning. And you guys know Susie Johnson, Dave Trozen's girlfriend. And she has pneumonia, and she's in St. Cloud. And she just told her family, just before I came up to preach, that she doesn't want to live anymore. And she is terrible. I mean, they just took her off the ventilator. She can barely talk. And she's no longer communicating with the family. She's just shut down because her pneumonia is that terrible. And I've got to remember where I was going with this one, too. Boy, this is terrible. Why did I tell you that story? I get so wrapped up in the story that I forget to tell you what it's about. Oh, yes, okay. So, with that going on in our church and with Cheryl having left us, and I know that my brother's just around the corner comparatively, what do you think they see right now? We feel so bad for our loss, but I wonder if they look and say, oh, if you could see things from my perspective, I've been set free from that thing you're still struggling with. Right? The darkness that's there, that's wreaking havoc over your spirit, your soul, I don't struggle with. I think they see it from a perspective that they go, don't feel bad for me. I'm the one praying for you right now. And I think so many times we read the Old Testament and we think that they're just terrible sinners. Terrible, terrible sinners. That's the effect that sin has on us. I was thinking this morning as I was getting ready to come in here, and I was thinking about King David. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but I preach up to the point that I preach, right? You know what I'm talking about, don't you? From the moment I start the sermon, which is usually about Tuesday sometimes I try to give myself 24 hours without having to really do anything. But once I start in again and putting it all together, I preach that sermon over and over and over and over again until I stand up here and preach it. And even during the night, I know it. Yep. I woke up this morning. I woke up this morning it was 3 something, and I looked at the clock, and I laid my head back down, and I went, oh, it's Sunday, Saturday, Sunday, I got to preach today, you know, and it was like, oh, it's okay, Jeff, you're ready, go back to sleep, you know, all right, I fall back to sleep, and that is on your mind even when you're sleeping. It's just, you know, but I preached this stuff, and I remember where I'm going with this one, and it was King David on my head, and I thought to myself, you know, we like it when the people that are spiritual examples in our lives, we like it when they have it all together. Because in following them, it gives us hope. But the reality is it doesn't matter who you are. You're susceptible to sin. You're not above it, ever. It doesn't mean that I don't get better at dealing with it the longer I go and the more I fight. And you would expect that. But that's like saying to someone who is an experienced veteran and on the battlefield, sticking them out there, and if they get shot or wounded, saying, what's your problem? There are bullets flying all around. Paul even calls the darts of the devil fiery darts, with which we're supposed to use the shield of faith to extinguish. But you know what? You know, on the battlefield like that, where darts are flying all around, it's not unexpected that you're going to get hurt once in a while or wounded. It doesn't mean you intentionally let your shield down, but something might get through, and then we go, oh, you know, oh, so terrible, so terrible. And it is sad. It's difficult, especially when it's a sin that could have been and should have been something that we dealt with, okay? But it doesn't mean that we look at them as though they are less than. We recognize that something's gotten through. And we who are spiritual, Paul says, are to restore them gently. So when we read the Old Testament, I say all this to say be very careful. Okay? Nothing special about us. So you have the comparison. It was better in Egypt, you know, manna, give me meat, give me quail. This is one of my favorite passages. Then in chapter 12, I've entitled this one Racism, right? We're dealing with racism. This is where, help me out here. Is it Miriam? Moses' sister? Yeah. Moses' wife. Yeah. Who is she's a Canaanite, but specifically from what tribe in Africa? I think she's a Cushite. Somebody got this? Numbers chapter 12? It's a Cushite. Okay. She's a Cushite. What historically is true about men and women from Cush? Where are they from, first of all? Which continent? Africa. What would be true of an African?
Very dark skin.
Cushites are extremely dark. Their heritage is, they're not just black, they are very black, okay? So Moses' sister Miriam has a really hard time with Moses' wife, the Cushite, which means Moses has more than one wife. Deal with that one. I know. You can't, yep. Everywhere he turns, he's got, mom ain't happy, ain't nobody happy, and we got lots of mamas here. Okay. So God says to Moses' sister, and I know this is me paraphrasing it. Well, what's he give her specifically? What's he inflict her with? Leprosy. What happens to the skin when it's leprous? What color does it turn?
White.
It seems as though God is saying, you think white is better than black? Or light skin is better than darker skin? I'll show you light skin. And he gives her leprosy. And if I remember the story right, Moses has to pray for her in order for this to be reversed. So what I'm saying here is in this chapter, it seems that there would be an element here where one group of people is saying, I'm better than the other group of people. And God inflicts a punishment on them that says, no, you're not. Right? Don't get this confused. God is not somebody who looks down on anybody because of their race. So that's chapter 12. In chapter 13, from there through chapter 13:33, you find the concept of doubting God. The spies in Canaan, they go in. Remember what they said? Oh, we can't beat these people. We look like grasshoppers in their eyes. And guys, I take that to be a literal statement, okay? It is the descendants here of Anak that we're dealing with. This is from, and we talked about this earlier, I got to remember the Og and Shihon, or Shihon, the giants that existed in the land. And these weren't just like, 7-foot tall people. These people were the mixture of what the fallen angels were trying to do to mess with the seed of God. So there's some kind of a genetic thing going on here. And God has said, listen, I'm going to give you this land. This is the promise. And they walk in and they say, holy mackerel, there's no way. Look at these, if you go back to the Genesis account, they called them heroes of old, right? I believe that this is where a lot of the mythology comes from. That they were beings of more than just human abilities. And so from their descendants we had people. I think this is why God gives us Samson. Okay? Because there's a Hercules. Because there is something of legend, of old, that's there, that God says, I have an answer to that. Right? So they go in and they say, well, we can't beat these people. Look at who they are. So we have this doubting going on in the book of Numbers. Right? This is why the timeout takes place. This is why I see Numbers from the book of the perspective of a disciplinary timeout. You can't believe, you can't trust that I am I am the God of the universe. I am sovereign over all things, including these giants. And I promised you I wouldn't wipe out the earth again with a flood, so you're okay. I've told you to go in and take the land. The only two people who really believe that God's capable of doing this, do you know who they are? It's on your sheet. I'm cheating. Joshua and Caleb. By the way, the only two people from this generation who will make it into the promised land. The rest of them will die. And I'm not giddy about that. Sometimes I wonder how that comes across when I say statements like that. The rest of them will die. It's like I'm excited or something. I'm not excited about that, all right? It's sad. I hope my life isn't one of those lives where it would be described as one of those that perished in the wilderness. So Joshua and Caleb are the two that are going to make it. Everyone else is described in the position of Korah's rebellion, the earthquake and the plague and all that swallows the people up. And then the rest of the generation will go off into the wilderness, or be in the wilderness, and that generation will pass off and die. Okay? Now we're going to move to the plains of Moab, and we'll discuss, while we're not planning anymore, we're not talking about, and you notice as you move across this, planning is 1 through 10, 10 through 19 is the protest. And then in 22 through 26, we're going to talk, or 22 through 36, we're we're going to look at the plains of Moab, which is the punishment that's going to take place. Now, out there, you guys know the story of Balak and Balaam and the curse that they want to put on Israel. And it really gets me. Help me remember, what is it? Which one's the Israelite priest? Is it Balaam? One of them's a priest that can't curse. Says, I can't curse him. Is it? Balaam's on the donkey. Yes? Yes, so it's Balaam. So Balak's asking for Balaam to curse. How do we defeat the Israelites? And they said, well, you know, since we can't beat them in battle, let's get one of the priests to put a curse from God. It's interesting how that would even work, right? It's as though somehow in the Old Testament, the ability to speak a curse is the same ability in the New Testament of an apostle's ability to heal. Right? An apostle didn't have to go around and say, okay, Lord, do you want me to heal this person or not? They had the ability to do it. Silver and gold have I none, but what I do have I give unto thee. Now, in the name of Jesus Christ, get up and walk. Right? We see that stuff in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, it seemed to work just as reverse. If someone would have spoken a word against Israel in the name of God, it may have stuck. And here's the deal. God wouldn't let Balaam say it. Wouldn't let him pronounce the curse. I'm almost out of time. Okay. Balak is the Moabite king. Or no, is that right? Did I have that? Yeah. Okay. Balak's the Moabite king. And then in Balaam, you can look at him and see who he is in 31, 7 through 8. Well, if we can't get them that way, we can't speak something against them, how in the world can we get their men to lose the battle? Well, that's where you find in 25, you find the lust of Israel, where they send the Moabite women into the nation of Israel. And the Moabite men, the Israelite men pay attention to the Moabite women. I'm just hearing her singing. Where am I at? Then in 26, I have the lust of Israel. You have the issues of the sons of Eleazar and the sons of Korah. Then you come down to chapter 26, and you see that another census is taken. Why do we have to do another census? We do another census because we're counting the people who have been lost, how many are left, how many have been reborn, or not reborn in the sense, how many have been born. What's the number that we have that we're going to go into the promised land with? Okay? Then in verse 20 or chapter 27, you see of the inheritance rights of the people that are going in. In 28 and 29, you see the celebrations. In 30, or the celebrations that are supposed to take place. You see in chapters 30 the promises that are given by God. In chapters 31, you're going to get the punishment or the vengeance or the trying to think of for those who are disobedient, what will take place. And then in 32 through 36, you see the boundaries given for what tribes get what. All right? So that's what the book of Numbers is all about in the sense of an outline. But understand, the book of Numbers is there because the seed has been promised. The child The children have been born, not the child, the children, the nation out of which the Messiah will come. The house rules, the family rules have been put in place, which is the book of Leviticus, and they're not able to do those, not able to keep up to the law, so we have to have a timeout. There's a punishment that takes place here. The rebellious, unwilling spirit of those who wouldn't go into the promised land, they have to be dealt with. They're going to have to die off as a generation before God brings their children into the promised land. And before we go into the promised land, which is the book of Joshua, we have the book of Deuteronomy. Can anybody tell me real quick, if I've been given the house rules in Leviticus and I'm stopped and I've been given the punishment in Numbers, what does Deuteronomy even mean? It is a retelling, but what's it a retelling of? Retelling of the rules, the law. Yep, before I ever take my children in, I'm going to say, now, why did we punish you the way we did? Okay? Why did we get in trouble? Well, we got in trouble because we didn't trust you. We didn't believe. That's right. What are we going to do this time? We're going to trust you and do what you say. That's why Deuteronomy's there, because we have to have a retelling of the law. We have to have a retelling of the family rules before we go to Valley Fair. Okay? We'll look at that next week. All right? Thanks, guys, for coming. Your children are outside awaiting your arrival. Some of you are going, what?